everybody, Dr. Mike Parisa again here with Zest Pediatrics of Solon. Thanks for tuning in to Simply the Zest. It's our new series where we're connecting with our networking partners just to get a sense of what they do and how they can best serve our families and the children we care for. One of our great friends today, Lauren Greenlief here with Inspire Connections Therapy. Want to sit down and talk about some speech concerns and questions. But first off, I want to let our viewers know how can they reach you, talk about your website and kind of some of the services that you offer.
Yeah. So, hi everybody, I'm Lauren. I am super excited to be here. We love all things Zest in my family. We are proud members of the Zest family and wouldn't change it for anything. I am a speech therapist. This is a speech therapy practice. We are here in my office. I have a website, inspireconnectionstherapy.com. Keeping it nice and simple for you. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram under the same thing. But yeah, we provide speech therapy services to all ages, language, articulation, speech sounds, a little bit of everything here.
Awesome. Yeah. So today, again, speech therapy, kind of thinking in that lens, wanted to talk a little bit about, speech concerns when they first arrive for families. So what are some of the things typically that you would look out for or kind of suggest for families if they're worried about their kids' language development?
Yeah, so speech has a bunch of different umbrellas, right? So one of the first things we look at is the language piece. And that's usually where I start with almost all of our families that we have a chat with. And I know as a doctor, that's where you usually start your conversation. So when we look at that, we have expressive language, which is the language that we're putting out into the world, and then receptive language, which is the language we're understanding. Families typically start to notice that expressive language piece more than anything. We like to see kids get their first words around 1. Some kids are a little bit later, but we're aiming for those first words around 1. And then by 2, we see this pretty decent jump to about 50 words. And that is when we also start to see kids putting together words. They have enough words that they can start putting them together. And then there's a huge jump by the time you get to 3. It's like hundreds of words.
Non-stop talking.
It's non-stop talking. They will always be there chatting in your ear. What's really cool about that, though, is 3 becomes that age where you should, as a parent, be able to understand about 75 to 100% of your kid's speech.
Sure.
So once that language piece kicks in, then we can start kind of talking about that speech sound piece. And that is really kind of like that cusp. We can totally work on speech sounds before that,
Sure.
but that's really where, like, if we don't have that intelligibility, we're not understandable by our parents, not necessarily strangers. That's like a whole different situation. But that's kind of where we look at being understood most of the time by a family member. So yeah, that's kind of where we start when we look at that language piece and then moving into the artic stuff.
Yeah, and I think you touched on such an important point too, right? It's so hard not to compare kids to other kids.
Absolutely.
Everybody develops on their own timeline,
Yep.
and it's everybody, on social media, right? Families are going to put out the best expressive things of their child.
They will.
So try not to compare your child to what you're seeing around others. I mean, use your pediatrician, use your kind of family members as a good check-in if they're concerned. I mean, if you're concerned, please raise those concerns.
Yeah.
But everybody develops on their own timeline, so keep that in
Absolutely.
mind when thinking through any sort of development.
Absolutely. Don't wait and see. If you are concerned, bring it up. Call a therapist for a consult. Come in for an evaluation. Like, the worst thing that happens is you do the eval and your kid's great.
Yeah.
It's definitely...
And you make a new friend.
Yeah, it's well worth it. I promise. Your kids will have a blast here. Yeah, it's definitely not worth waiting and seeing. And you will get that recommendation from people. You will hear family members say, oh, well, so-and-so didn't talk until they were 4, but figure it out for your own kid. And truly speaking, like, my kids developed language entirely different, and I'm sure yours did too.
Yep.
Completely different.
Yeah. And
So.
Again, comparing siblings to is so frustrating, right? Because you're like,
Yeah.
oh, my one kid was a little advanced, and what's going wrong?
Yeah.
They're all on their own timeline.
Yep.
As long as they're making some progress, they're not super far behind these developmental barriers or milestones. That's what's most important.
Yeah, and those milestones are typically what like 90% of kids are doing.
Sure.
So there's always there's an average, but then there's also that that's kind of where those milestones come into play.
Sure.
So worth looking into.
Yeah. So for some of the kids who are maybe a little bit behind, they're not grossly behind where we're noticing some abnormalities and we're like, yes, they need an evaluation. Thinking through kind of speech concerns, getting a hearing test is super important,
Absolutely.
right? Making sure there are not any hearing concerns, which is so important for language development, right?
Absolutely.
Chronic ear infections can cause problems with language development just with all the extra fluid in the ear.
Yep.
But thinking through some of these kids who are maybe just a little bit behind where they should be, what are some things that parents can work on at home or do at home to try and bolster that development?
Yeah. So Definitely check the hearing. Always, always, always. Even if there aren't chronic ear infections, there still might be fluid.
Sure.
And I've seen that happen a lot. So aside from that, there's a lot of things that you can just do in your environment to kind of set stuff up for communication. We almost call them like communication temptations in a sense, if that helps like visualize it. But even putting their favorite snack out of reach, closing the cupboard so they have to ask for it to be opened, putting toys in a container. Now, I'm not saying like make your house foolproof that no one can access anything, but some occasional things that they're gonna want to and have to communicate for is like a really, really great place to start. All right, so that is one idea. Another idea is kind of to check yourself on how many questions you ask a day. We have a tendency to quiz our kids like all day long without ever intending to, because I think as a parent, it's like really cool to know that your kid can answer a question. And questions almost always get you some type of answer. Sure. But unfortunately, when we ask tons of questions, constantly asking questions, we take a lot of vocabulary opportunities out. When we're commenting on things, oh, look how cool this is. Look at the big blue ball. Like, look up in the sky. We give so much more vocabulary than, what do you see up there? Or what is this? So that's another really good like tip and strategy to kind of get the ball rolling with adding some more vocabulary. Yeah.
So we talked through the importance of not comparing to other siblings.
Absolutely.
Hearing checks for kids with some language development. There's some things that you can work on at home, like we had talked about.
Yeah.
So families have tried all these things. Our kids are still behind. They're a couple. Usually, I worry when kids are at least 2 visits behind, kind of what they should be doing, unless there's some gross kind of abnormalities that we see.
Yeah.
What's the next steps from there?
Yeah. So reaching out to a speech therapist. You don't always have to get a doctor to be involved in that. It's great if you do, because the more eyes on it, the better. But reach out to a speech therapist and ask for an evaluation. Everybody does their evaluations just a teeny tiny bit differently, but especially as a young kid, a lot of it is just really play-based. We're doing a lot of play and getting a good idea of what things look like.
Sure.
There are some standard tests in there, but what happens is we can really kind of compare to the broader spectrum of kids and tell you what next steps are. We create goals, we do a lot of strategies and work to really make that language better and more successful for your kid, because really the goal is for them to be understood.
Sure.
Wherever they are, whenever they want to be, however that needs to be. So,
and I think it's incredible too, seeing when kids, first of all, they're behind with their language, some tantrums, some behavioral abnormalities. Yes. Once they get their language, it is amazing sometimes how their behavior just changes, because they can communicate, right? It's been so frustrating for them that they can't communicate, and all of a sudden, wow, look, these things have opened up for me. Now I can interact with my family like I wanted to.
Yeah, I always tell parents to kind of like think about those times where like you can't come up with a word and how irritating it is when you cannot figure out that word, and then like 4 hours later you figure it out, and it's like a weight lifted off your shoulder. Like that's as close as I could get to like not having the language, but also thinking too, kids that are trying really, really hard to tell you something and you're not understanding it, it's incredibly frustrating. It's like, I tell parents to kind of think of like when you're at a party that's really loud and you keep trying to tell the person across from you the same thing over and over and over again, and at some point you end up giving up because it's just not worth the attempt anymore. And that's what a lot of our little kids go through on a daily basis, and it causes a lot of frustrations and behavior, and we want to decrease that as much as possible.
Definitely. Not only for the kids' sake, but for our sake too, as parents.
Exactly. Oh, yes, exactly.
I think I want our viewers to hear it from you. Starting with therapies, your kid has a speech delay, longevity, what does it look like for them, right? Are they able to kind of overcome that hump?
Yeah. So it's one of those things, I don't think you'll ever meet a speech therapist that will give you a concrete number, because it's truly impossible for us to figure it out. And it's not us being like complicated with you. There's just so many factors that go into language development. We're not even just looking at language, we're looking at attention and the behaviors, and anything like physically can affect that too. So you won't get a clear answer on that. However, that being said, kids move through therapy. Like there will be kids that have challenges for a really long time, but with that support, they grow and they make progress. And that's the thing. Your kid is always going to grow and make progress as long as you're providing the right support and environment. So as long as you're doing that, you're doing exactly what you need to be doing.
Quickly jumping into kind of thinking some school-age kids, stuttering. Get questions about it a lot of time in the office. Talk me through kind of that process. is it, pathologic? Is it problematic early on? When does it become problematic? Kind of walk me through that.
Yeah, so you will get a lot of young families kind of come up with it. There's usually a time in language development where that starts to happen. I'm usually concerned if it's been more than 3 months. Or if you're seeing like physical things happen with it too, like you can physically see that they're getting stuck, or like they're looking away from you. Like there's different things you can kind of look for, or if there's a family history of it, definitely worth looking more into. Stuttering at this point in time is one of those things that we really work to support long term. It's not necessarily something we can eliminate entirely. It's it's the way your brain is processing speech and able to put speech out into the world, and there's only so much that we can do to move around that. But there's so many strategies that we can put in place that you can learn to support and your child can learn to do that can help make that an easier communication opportunity.
Yeah, I think knowing too that initially when kids are kind of getting a lot of this language too, it can be a normal kind of variant,
Absolutely.
right? For kids, I think 4 to 5, kind of somewhere in there.
Yeah, I usually say like preschoolish. You usually you can see kids like truly get speech therapy for stuttering before that, but most of it is school age. If you're younger, unless you start to hit like it's been an extended period of time, I'm not super concerned about it.
Fair.
Yeah.
I wanted to give you a chance just to quickly talk too about some of this awesome stuff that you do with AAC.
Yeah.
Talk me through that. Like I am so excited seeing your videos and stuff about it. It seems fantastic.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. I'm going to do a short and sweet version for you guys.
It.
But this behind us is a perfect example of what AAC is. So there's a bunch of different things. Basically, what AAC is a broad term, is anything but verbal speech used for communication. So it could be sign language, it could be pictures, it could be, this is like a light tech communication board, it could be something more high tech on a tablet. And essentially, the purpose being that we have some type of visual support to support the language output. We never operate as a this or that. We are all about any form of communication is a great form of communication as long as you're getting your point across. That's all that's important. So AAC itself, especially the high-tech versions, are tablets. You press a button and it verbally puts something out. It has speech output to it. So it's really, really helpful for our kids that are behind in language, that clearly understand everything that's happening, right? You likely have had a kid that you're like, you know what? They clearly understand everything that's going on. We're just not able to get it out in the world, which is even more frustrating. So AAC comes into play here, and they now have this visual representation of language that they can really easily access, and then they can start to learn the verbal piece of it at the same time. So yeah, it's a huge benefit, and truly anybody can benefit from it. You will probably see it more specifically in certain populations, but that doesn't mean that everybody can't use it. My kids had it. Like, all over the house, there's pictures. So
I think it's so amazing to families who have kids with speech delay. They get one of these devices and just like seeing how much they actually know. Like, oh, my kid wasn't saying anything. I didn't know they knew this. And then, oh my gosh, they know so much, right? They just couldn't communicate it.
Yeah, and we see that happen a lot in the school systems. So if you haven't got a device until you get into school, they're like, oh, well, they don't know how to count, or they don't know their colors, or they don't know their shapes. And it's not necessarily that they don't know them, it's just that they can't verbally put that out. And as soon as they have that visual representation, they tell you all these cool things. So it's a very powerful tool, and that's what I consider it. It's a tool. Just like we use texting, and we use email, and we ring a doorbell to tell somebody we're home. It's just a tool to help support it and grow it, and it's awesome. I have nothing but positive things to say about it.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us today and showing us around your wonderful office. Please check Lauren out. Inspire Connections Therapy. She's a fantastic resource for any family with some speech concerns or questions. We'll put up some information about her website again as far as how to contact her, but please reach out with any questions, concerns you have. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, we'll see you around. Bye.
Hi.